Welcome to Ancient Relics Keeper. Uncover hidden histories, lost artifacts, and ancient mysteries. Join us as we explore the past secrets. Subscribe and dive into history's untold stories. She was the last pharaoh of Egypt, a ruler of legendary intellect and power who challenged the Roman Empire. Yet, for over 2,000 years, Cleopatra's final resting place has remained one of history's greatest unsolved mysteries. The hunt for her tomb has led archaeologists from sunken cities to desert temples, and even points to whispers of secrets held deep within the Vatican itself. The story of Cleopatra's lost tomb begins not with its disappearance, but in the final, desperate moments of her life. To understand why it vanished, we first have to understand why it existed at all, and the extraordinary events that led to its creation. The year is 30 BCE. The air in Alexandria, the glittering capital of Egypt, is thick with fear and uncertainty. The city, a marvel of Greek architecture and Egyptian grandeur, is a gilded cage. Outside its walls, the unstoppable legions of Octavian, the future Emperor Augustus of Rome, are closing in. The final act of a decade-long power struggle is about to play out. Inside the royal palace, Cleopatra, the last pharaoh of Egypt, faces the ruin of her world. She is not just a queen known for her beauty. She is a brilliant political strategist, a linguist, a naval commander, and a woman who dared to believe she could rule the world alongside her Roman lover, Mark Antony. For years, they had been the golden couple of the East, their power and influence a direct challenge to Octavian's ambitions in the West. But their dream of a Roman-Egyptian empire had been shattered a year earlier in the waters of the Ionian Sea. The Battle of Actium was a disaster. Their formidable fleet, a combination of Roman warships and Egyptian vessels, was outmaneuvered and destroyed by Octavian's brilliant general, Agrippa. The retreat to Alexandria was not a strategic withdrawal, it was a flight for survival. Now, the consequences of that defeat had arrived at their doorstep. Mark Antony, a man of immense passion and legendary military prowess, was a shadow of his former self. He saw his legions deserting him, his allies abandoning him, and his world collapsing. Consumed by despair and misled by a false report of Cleopatra's death, he made his final, tragic decision. He fell on his own sword, a Roman's death for a man who felt he had lost everything. But the blow was not immediately fatal. His dying wish was to see Cleopatra one last time. His loyal soldiers carried his bleeding body to the mausoleum where Cleopatra had barricaded herself. It was a monument she had been building for herself, a formidable stone structure meant to be her final fortress and her eternal home. With the help of her two most trusted servants, Iras and Charmian, she hoisted the dying Antony up through a high window. There, in her arms, the great Roman general breathed his last. With Antony gone, Cleopatra was alone, a queen without a kingdom, facing the man who had destroyed her life's work. Octavian was not like Antony. He was not a man swayed by passion or romance. He was cold, pragmatic, and ruthlessly intelligent. His victory was absolute, but he needed one final prize to cement his legacy in Rome: Cleopatra herself. He didn't want her dead. He wanted her alive, to be paraded through the streets of Rome in his triumphal procession, a living symbol of his conquest over the exotic and powerful East. It would be the ultimate humiliation for the proud queen and the ultimate glory for him. He sent his men to capture her. They managed to enter her mausoleum through a window and seize her before she could take her own life. She was now a prisoner in her own palace. For a few days, a strange and tense chess match played out between the conqueror and the conquered. Cleopatra, ever the strategist, tried one last gamble. She met with Octavian, dressing not as a seductive queen, but as a grieving widow, hoping to appeal to his sense of pity or, perhaps, to once again weave the spell that had captivated both Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. But Octavian remained unmoved. His eyes were fixed on the treasure he saw around him, the immense wealth of the Ptolemaic dynasty. He offered her false assurances, promising to treat her with honor, but Cleopatra was no fool. She read the cold ambition in his eyes and knew her fate was sealed. She would not be led in chains. Her final act was a masterpiece of defiance, carefully staged to ensure her legacy. She requested permission to pay her last respects at Antony's tomb. After her visit, she returned to her chambers, bathed, and dressed in her finest royal robes, the regalia of the goddess Isis, whom she believed herself to be. She then sat down for a final, lavish meal. What happened next has become the stuff of legend. The ancient historian Plutarch, our best source for these events, tells us that a man arrived with a basket of figs. The guards inspected it and, seeing nothing but fruit, allowed it to pass. Hidden beneath the leaves and sweet figs was an asp, a venomous serpent that was a symbol of divine royalty in ancient Egypt. Its bite was said to grant immortality. In the quiet of her chambers, surrounded by her vast treasures gold, silver, pearls, ivory, and ebony, Cleopatra pressed the snake to her skin. Her two loyal servants, Iras and Charmian, chose to die with her. When Octavian's guards burst into the room, they found a scene of silent, majestic death. Cleopatra lay on her golden couch, dressed as a queen, looking not defeated, but as if she were merely sleeping. Iras lay dead at her feet, and Charmian, barely clinging to life, was seen straightening the diadem on her queen's head. "A fine deed, Charmian," one of the guards reportedly said. "Exceedingly fine," she replied with her last breath, "and befitting the descendant of so many kings." Octavian was furious. He had been denied his ultimate prize. Yet, in his anger, he made a decision that is central to our mystery. He could have desecrated her body, erased her name, and scattered her ashes. Instead, he ordered that she be given a magnificent royal burial, to be laid to rest alongside her beloved Mark Antony. Why would a conqueror show such respect to his fallen enemy? The answer lies in Roman politics, not sentiment. By giving her a formal burial, Octavian demonstrated his absolute control. He was so powerful that he could afford to be magnanimous. He was not a barbarian destroyer. He was a civilized ruler, bringing order to a chaotic world. Furthermore, it prevented Cleopatra from becoming a martyr. A desecrated queen could inspire rebellion. A formally buried one was a closed chapter, a historical fact under his authority. So, the order was given. The tomb of Cleopatra and Antony was sealed, filled with a treasure so vast it was said to have funded the Roman Empire for years. And for a time, its location was known. It was a landmark, a symbol of Rome's power and Egypt's end. But a tomb, no matter how magnificent, is only as safe as the city that holds it. And Alexandria, for all its splendor, was living on borrowed time. To truly grasp how such an important monument could disappear, we must transport ourselves to the Alexandria of Cleopatra's era. This was not just a city, it was the intellectual and cultural heart of the known world. Founded by Alexander the Great, it was designed to be a crossroads of civilizations. Its streets were laid out in a grid pattern, lined with colonnades of white marble. It was home to the legendary Great Library, a repository of all human knowledge, where scholars from across the globe came to study and debate. Towering over its harbor was the Pharos, the great lighthouse, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, its light visible from 100 miles out at sea. The city pulsed with life, a vibrant mix of Egyptians, Greeks, Romans, and Jews. The royal quarter, known as the Brucheion, was the most opulent part of the city. It was a sprawling complex of palaces, temples, gardens, and royal tombs, including the resting place of Alexander the Great himself. It was here, in this district of power and prestige, that Cleopatra's tomb was almost certainly located. For a few centuries after her death, it would have stood as a silent witness to the city's changing fortunes under Roman rule. But the very ground beneath Alexandria was unstable. The city is built on a narrow strip of land along the Mediterranean coast, a region prone to intense seismic activity. The earth itself was a slow, patient enemy. Then, on a summer day in 365 AD, the enemy struck with unimaginable force. A massive earthquake, with an epicenter near the island of Crete, ruptured the sea floor. It was one of the most powerful seismic events in recorded history. The quake sent a catastrophic tsunami racing across the Mediterranean. The historian Ammianus Marcellinus, who was alive at the time, described the terrifying scene. He wrote of how the sea suddenly pulled back, exposing the seabed, leaving ships stranded in the mud. Then, a mountainous wall of water returned with furious power, smashing into the coastlines of Libya, Greece, and Egypt. Alexandria was hit with devastating force. The waves surged into the city, sweeping away buildings, drowning thousands of people, and carrying ships from the harbor deep into the city, leaving them stranded on the rooftops of buildings when the waters receded. The destruction was immense, but the long-term effect was even more profound. The earthquake caused the coastline of Alexandria to subside, to sink permanently. The Grand Royal Quarter, the Brucheion, which had been the glittering heart of Cleopatra's city, began its slow descent into the sea. This was not a single, dramatic event, but a gradual process of decay that continued for centuries. More earthquakes followed in the 5th and 8th centuries, each one pulling the land a little further beneath the waves. The palaces where Cleopatra had lived, the temples where she had worshipped, and the tomb where she was buried were slowly claimed by the Mediterranean. For over 1,000 years, the lost world of Cleopatra's Alexandria was little more than a legend. Fishermen told stories of seeing the tops of columns and statues beneath the water on clear days. But the physical reality was gone, hidden beneath layers of sand and sea. It wasn't until the 1990s that modern technology allowed us to rediscover this sunken realm. Underwater archaeologist Frank Gaudio and his team began to systematically map the seabed of Alexandria's harbor. What they found was astonishing. They uncovered the foundations of palaces, temple columns, sphinxes, and statues, the lost royal quarter, frozen in time. They brought up artifacts that Cleopatra herself would have touched. The discovery proved that a huge part of the ancient city was indeed underwater, confirming that her tomb could very well be submerged, its entrance blocked by silt and fallen masonry, lost forever to all but the most advanced deep-sea explorers. Nature, it seemed, had provided a powerful explanation for the tomb's disappearance. But nature wasn't the only force working to erase Cleopatra's memory. A new power was rising across the empire, one that saw her not as a queen, but as a symbol of everything it sought to destroy. While earthquakes and tsunamis were physically pulling Alexandria into the sea, a different kind of seismic shift was shaking the foundations of the Roman Empire. This was a revolution of faith. Christianity, which began as a small, persecuted sect, was growing with unstoppable force. By the 4th century, it had become the dominant religion of the empire. This shift had profound consequences for the old pagan world and for the legacy of figures like Cleopatra. To understand this, we must remember who Cleopatra was in a religious sense. She was not just a political ruler, she was worshipped as a living goddess. She embraced the title of the new Isis, presenting herself as the reincarnation of the most powerful and beloved goddess in the Egyptian pantheon. Isis was the divine mother, the goddess of magic, healing, and rebirth. For centuries, her cult was immensely popular, not just in Egypt, but across the entire Roman world. Cleopatra's power and identity were deeply intertwined with this pagan faith. Her tomb, therefore, would have been more than just the final resting place of a queen. It would have been a sacred shrine to the goddess Isis herself, a major site of pilgrimage for those who still followed the old ways. It would have been a potent symbol of a world that the rising tide of Christianity sought to sweep away. In 391 AD, the Roman Emperor Theodosius issued a decree that would seal the fate of the pagan world. He outlawed all pagan worship and ordered the closure or destruction of its temples. What followed was a wave of organized iconoclasm across the empire. Mobs of zealous Christians, often led by monks and bishops, descended upon the ancient temples, viewing them as dens of demons. Alexandria, a city with a long and proud pagan history, became a flashpoint for this conflict. The most famous example was the destruction of the Serapeum, a magnificent temple complex dedicated to the god Serapis, which also housed a daughter collection of the Great Library. Christian crowds stormed the temple, smashed its sacred statues, and burned its precious scrolls. It was a violent, symbolic act meant to demonstrate the triumph of the new faith over the old. If a grand temple like the Serapeum could be utterly destroyed, what chance did Cleopatra's tomb have? It is highly probable that her mausoleum, a powerful pagan monument, suffered a similar fate. It may have been systematically dismantled, its stones repurposed to build new churches. Its opulent treasures would have been looted, its pagan inscriptions and images of gods defaced and chiseled away. Its very location may have been deliberately erased from maps and records, a conscious effort to wipe the memory of the pagan queen from history. This was not just neglect, it was a form of cultural and historical warfare. The goal was to ensure that future generations would not have a place to worship her, to remember her as a goddess. They sought to reduce her from a divine figure to a mere footnote in a history written by her conquerors. Thus, the mystery of the vanishing tomb deepens. It was besieged by a trio of forces. It was built by a political enemy, an act of calculated control. It was swallowed by the earth and sea, a victim of natural disaster. And it was attacked by a new religion, a casualty of a war of faith. Caught between the cold ambition of Rome, the relentless power of the sea, and the fervent zeal of a new world order, the final resting place of Egypt's last queen was effectively erased from existence, leaving behind only whispers, legends, and a 2,000-year-old question that continues to haunt historians and adventurers to this day. For centuries, the search for Cleopatra's tomb seemed like a hopeless endeavor, a puzzle with its most important piece missing. The prevailing theory held that her final resting place was somewhere within the sunken royal quarter of Alexandria, a magnificent mausoleum now lost beneath the waves of the Mediterranean, its secrets guarded by silt and sea. It was a romantic, but ultimately frustrating conclusion. Any attempt to find it would be like searching for a single grain of sand on a vast, submerged beach. The trail, it seemed, had gone cold forever. But what if everyone was looking in the wrong place? What if the queen, in her final, defiant act, chose a location far from the collapsing heart of her city? This is where the modern hunt begins, not with a new discovery, but with a radical new idea, championed by a woman whose relentless passion would reignite the 2,000-year-old search. That woman is Dr. Kathleen Martinez. Her story is as unconventional as her theory. She is not a lifelong Egyptologist who rose through the traditional academic ranks. She was a successful criminal lawyer from the Dominican Republic, a scholar of law and finance. For years, her life was one of courtrooms and legal arguments, a world away from the dusty landscapes of Egypt. But for over a decade, she harbored a secret obsession: Cleopatra. She devoured every text, every piece of research she could find on Egypt's last queen. She was fascinated not by the romanticized image of a seductress, but by the reality of a brilliant, highly educated leader who commanded armies and navies, spoke multiple languages, and held the Roman Empire at bay. As Martinez studied Cleopatra's life, she became convinced that the accepted narrative of her death and burial was incomplete. A woman of such intellect and symbolic power, she reasoned, would not have simply allowed her enemy, Octavian, to dictate the terms of her afterlife. She would have planned her death as meticulously as she planned her political strategies. The idea of her tomb being in Alexandria, the city that was about to fall into Roman hands, felt wrong. It was too predictable, too vulnerable. Martinez believed Cleopatra would have chosen a place of immense spiritual significance, a location that would speak not of her defeat, but of her divine destiny. Her lawyer's mind began to piece together a case, looking for clues that others had overlooked. And her investigation led her 30 miles down the coast from Alexandria to a windswept, crumbling desert temple overlooking the sea, a place called Taposiris Magna. The name itself was the first major clue. In ancient Egyptian, Taposiris Magna translates to the Great Tomb of Osiris. This was not just a name, it was a profound religious statement. To understand its importance, we have to delve into the very heart of Egyptian mythology, a story that Cleopatra had woven into her own identity. The myth of Isis and Osiris is one of the most powerful and enduring legends of the ancient world. Osiris was a wise and benevolent king who was murdered by his jealous brother, Set. His body was dismembered and scattered across the land. His devastated wife and sister, the powerful goddess Isis, embarked on an epic quest to find every piece of his body. Using her formidable magic, she reassembled him, breathed life back into him, and conceived their son, Horus. Osiris then became the ruler of the underworld, the lord of the dead, and a symbol of resurrection and eternal life. Cleopatra did not just worship Isis, she claimed to be her living embodiment on earth. She was the new Isis. It was a central part of her royal propaganda and her personal faith. And if she was Isis, then her great love, Mark Antony, was her Osiris. In their final days, as their mortal world crumbled, it makes perfect sense that Cleopatra would turn to the immortal world of myth for her final act. She wouldn't just be burying herself and her lover, she would be enacting the final chapter of the legend. She, as Isis, would be joining her Osiris for eternity. And where better to do that than in a temple explicitly named the Great Tomb of Osiris? It would be a final, masterful move, a symbolic victory snatched from the jaws of military defeat. It would ensure that in the afterlife, she and Antony would be reborn together, not as conquered Romans, but as Egyptian gods. This theory was compelling, but it went against more than a century of mainstream Egyptological thought. When Kathleen Martinez first presented her idea to the Egyptian authorities, she was met with skepticism. Why would a queen be buried so far from the capital? Why would she choose a relatively modest temple over a grand Alexandrian mausoleum? Many believed Taposiris Magna was a minor religious site, long since picked clean by tomb robbers and of little archaeological importance. But Martinez was persistent. Drawing on her skills as a lawyer, she built her case, presenting 12 solid arguments based on her research. For 2 years, she lobbied for a chance to prove her theory. Finally, impressed by her sheer determination and the logic of her arguments, the renowned Zahi Hawass, then the head of Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities, granted her a 2-month permit to excavate. It was a long shot, but it was a chance. In 2005, Kathleen Martinez traded her legal robes for desert boots and began to dig, hoping to find evidence where others believed there was none. The first seasons of excavation were grueling and yielded little. Taposiris Magna was a challenging sight. The sun was relentless, the wind unforgiving, and centuries of sand had buried everything deep. The team methodically cleared away layers of earth, finding pottery shards and minor artifacts, but nothing that screamed Cleopatra. The initial 2-month permit stretched into years of patient, painstaking work. The skepticism from the wider archaeological community remained. Many believed she was on a fool's errand, chasing a romantic fantasy. But Martinez's belief never wavered. She felt a deep connection to the site, a certainty that she was in the right place. And then, slowly but surely, Taposiris Magna began to give up its secrets. The first breakthrough came in the form of small, metallic discs, coins. The team began to unearth dozens of coins dating directly to Cleopatra's reign. This was significant. But what was truly exciting was that many of them were stamped with her portrait, her distinctive profile with its hooked nose and powerful jaw. In total, over 200 of these coins were found scattered throughout the temple grounds. This was the first piece of hard, tangible evidence that directly linked the queen to this specific location. Of course, critics were quick to point out that coins travel. They could have been left by merchants, soldiers, or worshippers as offerings. But the sheer quantity found at Taposiris Magna suggested a stronger connection. It was as if the queen herself had left her calling card. The discoveries grew in significance. The team unearthed a large, headless statue carved from granite. Its style was unmistakably Ptolemaic, belonging to the dynasty of Greek rulers of which Cleopatra was the last. Though its head was missing, preventing a definitive identification, its regal posture suggested it was a king or pharaoh. Could it be a statue of one of Cleopatra's ancestors, or even Mark Antony, honored as an Egyptian ruler? Without a head or an inscription, it was impossible to say, but it was another piece that fit the puzzle, placing the site firmly within the correct historical and cultural context. Then came the discovery that truly began to shift opinions. The team uncovered a vast cemetery just outside the main temple walls. This was not a simple burial ground. It was a necropolis for the elite. They found a series of rock-cut tombs containing high-status mummies from the Greco-Roman period Cleopatra's time. These were not the lavish, gold-encased mummies of pharaohs like Tutankhamun, but they were clearly the remains of wealthy and important individuals. Some of them revealed a fascinating and macabre detail. Their mouths contained tongues made of pure gold leaf. This was a rare funerary practice, and its symbolism was potent. The golden tongue was believed to allow the deceased to speak to the gods in the afterlife, particularly to Osiris, the judge of the dead. Finding these golden-tongued mummies in a temple dedicated to Osiris was a powerful indicator of the site's importance as a gateway to the next world. It proved that wealthy nobles, contemporaries of Cleopatra, believed that being buried at Osiris Magna would grant them a special audience with the gods. If it was a desirable burial spot for them, how much more so would it have been for the queen who saw herself as Osiris's divine consort? The evidence was mounting, painting a picture of Osiris Magna not as a minor provincial temple, but as a major religious and funerary center deeply connected to the Osiris myth. But the most dramatic discovery was yet to come, and it lay hidden deep beneath the bedrock of the temple itself. Using ground-penetrating radar, the team detected anomalies beneath the stone floor. They began to excavate, and what they found was breathtaking. A series of deep shafts leading down into the earth, and an intricate network of hidden tunnels. One of these tunnels was an engineering marvel. It stretched for nearly a mile, carved directly out of the solid rock, descending deep into the darkness. It was a secret passageway, its entrance once hidden from view within the sacred confines of the temple. The discovery of these tunnels electrified the archaeological world and sent a shockwave of excitement through the public. Tunnels like these often lead to hidden tombs. They were designed to protect the final resting place of a king or queen from looters, a secret route to an eternal sanctuary. The team has spent years carefully exploring this subterranean world. It is a dangerous and delicate process. The air is stale, the risk of collapse is ever present, and every inch of the tunnel must be documented. Inside, they have found more artifacts, more pottery, more clues that strengthen the connection to Cleopatra's era. But the ultimate prize, a sealed chamber containing a royal sarcophagus, has so far remained elusive. The tunnels have led to chambers, some flooded with water, others empty, but not to the queen's tomb. This has led to the final, critical phase of the modern hunt, the unanswered question. After nearly 2 decades of tireless work, Kathleen Martinez has transformed our understanding of Osiris Magna. She has taken a forgotten ruin and placed it at the very center of one of history's greatest mysteries. Her discoveries are undeniable. The coins bearing Cleopatra's face, the Ptolemaic statue, the elite cemetery with its golden-tongued mummies, and the spectacular network of hidden tunnels. The circumstantial evidence is overwhelming. And yet, the central question, the one that drives the entire search, remains unanswered. Is Cleopatra's tomb actually here? This is where the story shifts from the excitement of discovery to the sober reality of scientific scrutiny. Mainstream Egyptology, while deeply impressed by Martinez's finds, remains cautious. The burden of proof in archaeology is exceptionally high, and for a claim as monumental as finding the tomb of Cleopatra, the evidence must be definitive. And so far, critics argue it is not. They point out that while the coins are compelling, they don't prove a burial. The temple was a major pilgrimage site, and offerings from across the kingdom would be expected. The headless statue cannot be identified. The elite mummies, while important, are not royal. There is a vast difference between the burial of a wealthy nobleman and the tomb of a queen who is worshipped as a goddess. The most crucial piece of missing evidence is an inscription. In ancient Egypt, royal tombs were almost always inscribed with the name and titles of the person buried within. A cartouchian oval shape containing the pharaoh's name is the archaeological equivalent of a signed confession. Despite years of searching at Taposiris Magna, not a single inscription has been found that names Cleopatra or Mark Antony. Without this smoking gun, the theory, however logical and romantic, remains just stated theory. This leaves us with a profound and tantalizing dilemma. Is Kathleen Martinez on the verge of making the most important archaeological discovery since Howard Carter found Tutankhamun's tomb a century ago? Are these hidden tunnels a winding path leading to a final, sealed chamber where the last queen of Egypt lies undisturbed? Is the world holding its breath on the cusp of solving a 2,000-year-old mystery? Or is there another explanation? It is possible that Taposiris Magna was indeed a massively important religious center, a place Cleopatra herself patronized and may have even intended to be buried. But her plans may have been cut short by the rapid advance of Octavian's army. Perhaps she was buried hastily in Alexandria after all, and the temple in the desert remains only a monument to her faith, not her final resting place. The hunt at Taposiris Magna continues. Every new season of digging brings the possibility of a breakthrough. The team continues to explore the tunnels, to scan the earth, to search for a hidden chamber, a blocked entrance, or that one definitive inscription. Kathleen Martinez remains as convinced as ever, her belief fortified by the wealth of evidence she has uncovered. For her, the lack of a final discovery is not a failure, but simply a sign that the tomb is exceptionally well hidden, just as a clever queen would have wanted. And so the world watches, caught between the passion of a dedicated archaeologist and the cautious skepticism of science. The desert holds its breath, and the story of the modern hunt for Cleopatra's tomb remains a cliffhanger, its final chapter still unwritten. The search for Cleopatra's tomb has, for decades, been a story written in sand and stone. We have followed archaeologists as they sifted through the desert soil of Taposiris Magna and dived into the sunken ruins of Alexandria. These are quests for a physical place, a tangible discovery of stone chambers and golden sarcophagi. But as the years turn into decades with no definitive success, a radical and unsettling question begins to emerge. What if the key to finding the tomb is not a shovel, but a secret? What if the answer lies not buried under the Egyptian landscape, but locked away on a dusty shelf, filed within the most secure and impenetrable archive on Earth? To explore this theory, we must leave the sun-scorched deserts of Egypt and travel north, to the heart of an empire that conquered Cleopatra's world and, in doing so, may have become the silent guardian of her final secret. Our journey takes us to Rome and, ultimately, behind the sacred walls of the Vatican. This line of inquiry begins with a simple, brutal, and undeniable historical fact. The Roman Empire was the greatest plunderer the ancient world had ever seen. When Rome conquered a nation, it did more than just defeat its armies and tax its people. It absorbed its entire history, its culture, and its treasures. And no conquest was more symbolic or more lucrative than that of Egypt. In 30 BCE, when Octavian's legions marched into Alexandria, they weren't just taking control of a strategic piece of land. They were seizing the accumulated wealth and legacy of a civilization that was already 3,000 years old when Rome was still a provincial town. Egypt was the breadbasket of the Mediterranean, but it was also a treasure chest overflowing with gold, art, and something even more valuable: knowledge. The process of appropriation was systematic and on a scale that is difficult to comprehend today. Fleets of Roman ships sailed from the harbor of Alexandria, their hulls heavy with spoils. They carried away vast quantities of grain to feed the masses in Rome, but they also carried the very symbols of pharaonic power. The most stunning examples of this are the colossal granite obelisks that once stood before the great temples of Heliopolis and Luxor. These were not just decorative pillars, they were sacred monuments, each carved from a single piece of stone, weighing hundreds of tons, and covered in hieroglyphs praising the gods and immortalizing the pharaohs. To the Egyptians, they were conduits between the heavens and the earth. To the Romans, they were the ultimate trophies. The engineering challenge of moving these monoliths across the Mediterranean Sea was staggering. It required specialized ships, brilliant engineers, and immense manpower. Yet the Romans did it repeatedly. They tore these sacred needles from their ancient foundations, transported them to Rome, and re-erected them in their own public space in circuses, in forums, and before the tombs of their own emperors. It was the ultimate statement of dominance. Today, more ancient Egyptian obelisks stand in Rome than in any single city in Egypt. The most famous of all stands in the very center of St. Peter's Square, directly in front of the largest church in Christendom. Every day, hundreds of thousands of visitors stand in the shadow of this 4,000-year-old Egyptian relic, a silent testament to Rome's power to take, transport, and repurpose history itself. But the Romans took more than just stone and gold. They understood that true, lasting power came from controlling information. They were obsessed with history, with records, with knowledge. As they conquered the Greek-speaking world, they absorbed its intellectual inheritance. This brings us to the fabled Library of Alexandria. While it had already suffered from fires and neglect long before Cleopatra's time, it was still a powerful symbol of accumulated knowledge. The Romans, as the new masters of Egypt, became the inheritors of what was left. They seized countless papyrus scrolls, works of science, mathematics, philosophy, and most importantly for our story, history, and geography. These records would have included detailed maps of the Nile Delta, architectural plans for major monuments, and official state chronicles. Among these countless documents, it is entirely plausible, even probable, that there existed detailed records pertaining to the royal tombs of the Ptolemaic dynasty. This could have been a governor's report, an inventory of the treasure sealed within, or a precise map detailing the layout of Cleopatra's mausoleum and its exact location. Such a document would have been of immense strategic and administrative value to the new Roman rulers. They would need to know the location of such a significant landmark, if only for security reasons. This information, this precious scroll, would have been carefully catalogued and shipped back to Rome, destined for the imperial libraries and state archives, the very heart of the empire's administrative machine. It would have become one small piece of data in the vast intellectual spoils of a conquered world. The tomb itself may have remained in Egypt, but the key to its location, the blueprint of its existence, almost certainly sailed to Rome. And it is what happened to those Roman archives that forms the next crucial link in this speculative chain. Empires fall. It is the one constant of history. By the 5th century AD, the Western Roman Empire was crumbling under the weight of internal decay and external invasions. The city of Rome was sacked, its institutions collapsed, and Europe was plunged into a period of chaos and fragmentation. In this power vacuum, one institution not only survived but thrived. It was the Christian Church. Based in Rome, the papacy began to consolidate its power, positioning itself as the spiritual and, increasingly, the political successor to the fallen empire. It inherited Rome's legacy, its language, its administrative structures, and, most critically, its records. As the old imperial libraries and state offices were abandoned or destroyed, their contents were often saved and absorbed by the one institution that valued literacy and the preservation of texts, the Church. Monasteries across Europe became islands of knowledge, their scribes patiently copying ancient manuscripts. And in Rome, the nascent papal administration began to build its own archive, a collection that would eventually become the most extensive and secret in the world. This brings us to the heart of our theory, the Vatican Apostolic Archives, more famously and perhaps more accurately known as the Vatican Secret Archives. The term secret is not as sinister as it sounds. In its original Latin, secretum meant private, referring to the personal archives of the Pope. But over the centuries, as its contents grew and its access became more restricted, the name took on a mystique that it has never lost. And for good reason. The sheer scale of the archives is almost beyond imagination. It is not a single room filled with old books. It is a vast, climate-controlled complex containing an estimated 85 kilometers or 53 miles soft shelving. If you were to line up all the documents end to end, they would stretch from Rome to Florence. It contains millions of documents spanning more than 12 centuries of human history. We know some of what is inside. There are papal decrees that shaped the course of nations. There are the trial records of figures like Galileo Galilei and the Knights Templar. There are personal letters from historical titans like Michelangelo, Queen Mary I of England, and Abraham Lincoln. These are the documents the Vatican has chosen to reveal, offering carefully curated glimpses into its immense collection. But what about the rest? What about the countless documents that have never been seen by outside scholars? What about the pre-Christian texts, the records absorbed from the ruins of the Roman state? It is here that the possibility of a Cleopatra connection becomes truly tantalizing.
Immagine a scenario.
A papyrus scroll, a dry administrative report from a Roman official in 1st century Alexandria, details the location and contents of Cleopatra's tomb. This scroll, along with thousands of others, survives the fall of Rome. It is taken into the papal collections, perhaps because it was stored alongside other documents deemed important. Its significance is not immediately recognized. It's written in Greek or Latin. Its subject matter, the tomb of a long-dead pagan Canis, of little interest to early Christian scholars focused on theology and church doctrine. It is catalogued, filed away on a shelf deep within the growing archives, and forgotten. It is not being actively hidden. It is simply lost within the labyrinthine bureaucracy of the world's largest library, an administrative ghost waiting for centuries to be rediscovered. This is the most benign version of the theory. It suggests the information is there, but its existence is unknown even to the modern curators of the archives. It would be a discovery waiting to happen, a matter of someone knowing what to look for among millions of documents. But the themes of our channel, the patterns of history, suggest a darker, more complex possibility. What if the document was found? What if, at some point in the centuries that followed, a Vatican librarian or a high-ranking cardinal stumbled upon this record, understood its explosive significance, and made a conscious decision not to reveal it? What if the location of Cleopatra's tomb is not a forgotten fact, but a guarded secret? This leads us to the final and most profound question. Why? Why would the Vatican, an institution dedicated to history and faith, deliberately hide the key to one of archaeology's greatest prizes? The answer may lie in the concept that has driven so much of human history, the control of a dangerous truth. To understand the potential motive, we must once again consider who Cleopatra was and what her tomb would represent. Its discovery would be far more than just a spectacular archaeological find. It could be a Pandora's box, capable of unleashing ideas that challenge the very bedrock of established historical and religious narratives. Let us consider the potential threats. The first is a religious one. As we've discussed, Cleopatra was the living embodiment of the goddess Isis. The cult of Isis was one of Christianity's most significant rivals in the early Roman Empire. It was a sophisticated religion that offered its followers a message of hope, resurrection, and a personal relationship with a compassionate mother goddess. It was immensely popular, with temples dedicated to Isis found from Britain to the Black Sea. Now, imagine the discovery of Cleopatra's tomb, intact. It would undoubtedly be filled with powerful religious iconography related to the Isis cult. There might be statues, sacred texts, and ritual objects of a kind never before seen. In an age of mass media, the discovery would trigger a global fascination with this ancient faith. It could spark a popular revival of interest in a powerful pagan belief system, presenting a narrative that, for some, might seem a compelling alternative to traditional Western religion. For an institution like the Vatican, which has spent 2 millennia establishing its theological authority, the unearthing of a potent and charismatic rival, even an ancient one, could be seen as an unnecessary and unwelcome complication. It is far safer for the established order if the goddess remains sleeping. But the threat might be more historical than religious. The history we are taught is the history written by the victors. Our image of Cleopatra has been shaped almost entirely by Roman propaganda, particularly by the poets and historians loyal to her conqueror, Octavian. They painted her as a decadent, manipulative foreign sorceress who corrupted noble Roman men and threatened the stability of the Republic. This was a caricature designed to justify Rome's war against her. But what if her tomb contained her own version of the story? The Ptolemaic dynasty, for all its intrigue, was a dynasty of scholars. Cleopatra herself was highly educated. It is entirely conceivable that her tomb would contain a library of scrolls, her own memoirs, personal letters, or official court histories written from an Egyptian perspective. What if these texts told a different story? A story of a brilliant and capable ruler trying to save her kingdom from the relentless expansion of a foreign superpower. A story that painted Mark Antony not as a man bewitched, but as a partner in a grand political vision for a different kind of Mediterranean empire. What if they contained personal reflections on her relationship with Julius Caesar that challenged the Roman narrative? The discovery of such a counterhistory, written by one of history's most famous women, would be a bombshell. It would force a radical reevaluation of the founding myths of the Roman Empire, the very empire upon which much of Western civilization, including the Church, was built. Controlling which version of history is told is a fundamental source of power. Revealing a primary source that could upend that narrative might be a risk deemed too great to take. Finally, we come to the most speculative and, for some, the most chilling possibility. This possibility connects to the precise timing of Cleopatra's death in 30 BCE. The world she inhabited was the same world that, just a few decades later, would see the birth of Christianity. The political landscape of her time included the Kingdom of Judea, ruled by figures like King Herod the Great, who feature prominently in the New Testament. Alexandria had a massive and influential Jewish population. The political and religious currents of the entire Eastern Mediterranean were intertwined. What if the records in Cleopatra's tomb contained information about this specific time and place that is not found anywhere else? This is deep into the realm of what if, but it is a question that must be asked within the context of hidden history. Could there be administrative records detailing dealings with the Herodian court? Could there be reports from spies or diplomats about the various messianic movements and religious sects bubbling up in Judea at the time? Could there be a document, however obscure, that offers a contemporary, non-biblical perspective on the political or social climate that would give rise to Jesus of Nazareth? Any such document, however small, would be of incalculable historical value. If it confirmed the biblical narrative, it would be a priceless artifact for the Church. But what if it contradicted it? What if it mentioned a key figure in a different context, or described an event in a way that challenges a core tenet of the faith? The discovery of such a text would be world-altering. The desire to prevent such a possibility, to keep that Pandora's box firmly shut, would be an overwhelming motive for secrecy. And so, the theory of the Vatican connection leaves us suspended between plausibility and high-stakes speculation. It is a theory built on a chain of logical steps: Rome's looting of Egyptian knowledge, the Church's inheritance of Roman archives, and the existence of the vast, inaccessible Vatican's secret archives. The final link, the motive for Secretius, the one forged in the fires of power, religion, and the control of history. It suggests that the answer to this ancient mystery might not be a question of archaeology, but of access. The truth may not be waiting for a new technology or a lucky discovery, but for a change of heart, a decision by the custodians of history to open a long-closed door. Until that day, if it ever comes, we are left to wonder: is the search for Cleopatra's tomb a quest for a physical place, or is it a hunt for a forbidden document, a secret hidden in plain sight, resting on a shelf in the heart of Rome? The search for Cleopatra continues to be a story of contrasts, of historical fact versus tantalizing legend, and of dedicated archaeology versus whispers of hidden knowledge. Whether her tomb lies beneath the waves, waits at the end of a desert tunnel, or is described on a forgotten scroll in Rome, the last queen of Egypt continues to guard her final secret from the world. Thanks for exploring with Ancient Relics Keeper. What mystery should we unravel next? Like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. Let's keep digging into history's secrets together.